You can't just say, oh, well, it's a big truck, and so, they need to do something to protect me. You need to protect yourself as well.
If a truck accident happens with injuries and weather is a contributing factor, could there still be a case to sue for damages? We're going to find out the answer to that question and many more on today's episode of Ask the Lawyer. Hi, everybody. I'm Judy Maggio with AskTheLawyers.com, and my guest today is Utah attorney Kevin Swenson, who is also a board-certified truck accident lawyer. Before we get started, we want to remind everyone, if you want to ask Kevin a question of your own, simply go to AskTheLawyers.com, click on that button at the top of the page that says Ask a Lawyer, or simply call the number you see on your screen during this conversation. Thanks so much for being with us today, Kevin.
Thank you.
First, I want to ask about this tragic crash that happened in Grand County, Utah. News reports are saying it was caused by gusts of wind. So how common is it for wind and weather to cause these large-scale truck accidents?
So it's fairly common for weather to be a factor. In Utah, Colorado, you've got a lot of mountainous area. You get a lot of rain, a lot of snow, a lot of wind. So those are all factors that you have to look at in any kind of crash.
So if a truck crash was indeed caused by these high gusts of wind, then is no one responsible, even if it ends in a tragic death or injury like this one did?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so just because weather's a factor doesn't mean somebody's not responsible for it. Trucking companies have an obligation to use, due diligence, reasonable care to make sure that they're driving in the conditions that are appropriate. And there are regulations in the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act that require them to take certain actions if the weather is adverse. So that it may require them to slow down, it may require them to get off the roads, but what they can't do is say, this is bad weather, but I'm just getting in my truck and I'm going 80 miles an hour and hope for the best. So there are, regulations that dictate what they do and how they act in those kind of conditions.
Well, obviously these trucking companies can't control the weather, but are there certain practices, certain things these companies could put in place to prevent these kinds of accidents?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that they can do is when they're planning a trip, look at what the weather forecast is and see if there are alternative routes. Instead of taking Interstate 80, you may take Interstate 70, where the weather is different. And so there are different things you can do to make the pre-trip planning better. And then if you do experience the bad weather, you need to reevaluate that and see if it's still a safe situation, if you need to slow down, or if you need to get off the road completely and wait for the weather to change. So there are quite a few different things that they can be doing and should be doing to monitor the weather and its effect on their trip.
So Kevin, in your experience and your opinion, do you think that trucking companies do take the safety of their drivers and passengers in other cars into account when it comes to winter weather?
That's another really good question. And there are trucking companies that are very conscientious of that they do the right things, that they monitor weather conditions, that they monitor, their drivers very carefully, and they make sure that they are putting safe drivers on the road. There are other companies that are, hey, we got to have the wheels turning or we're not making any money. And so they're sending them out and saying, hey, if it's bad weather, deal with it, but you need to get, these miles, you need to get to this location. And those are the companies that cause a lot of risk for the public.
Are there certain things when all of us drive, when people drive in passenger vehicles, to take into account when there is wintry weather in places like Utah?
Yeah, there are things we should all do and should all pay attention to. When you're driving around a big truck like that, you do have to realize it's going to take them some time to stop. And so you don't want to get right in front of them. You don't want to slow down quickly. I mean, you want to give them the space that they need. And you want to, be careful as you're passing them. But you need to use good common sense in your driving as well. You can't just say, oh, well, it's a big truck, and so, they need to do something to protect me. You need to protect yourself as well.
This has been such helpful information. We certainly appreciate your time, Kevin.
Thank you.
Well, that'll do it for this episode of AskTheLawyers.com. Our guest today has been Utah attorney Kevin Swenson. And don't forget, if you want to ask Kevin questions about your particular situation, go to AskTheLawyers.com and click on the button there at the top of the page that says Ask a Lawyer. It's an easy way to get those questions answered. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Judy Maggio with Ask the Lawyers.